Welcome back to the Unlicensed Therapist. If you're new here, this is the space where we talk honestly about what it's like to become a therapist. The parts grad school didn't prepare you for, the parts supervision didn't explain clearly, and the parts we're all pretending we're not confused about. Today's topic is one that every new clinician thinks they understand until they're knee deep in it: supervision and supervisors. We're going to look today at the different types of supervisors, why they are not interchangeable, how they overlap just enough to confuse everyone, and how misunderstanding them can derail your licensure, your job, or your confidence. I'm going to say something bold. Most new clinicians don't actually know who their supervisor is. Not really. Not in the legal sense. Not in the clinical sense. Not in the employment sense. And that confusion, it leads to missed hours, ethical mistakes, burnout, resentment, and a whole lot of wait. You're not my supervisor moments. So today, we're going to slow down and walk through the three major types of supervision, how they overlap, how they conflict, and why they are absolutely not the same, even though agencies often pretend that they are. Let's start with the basics. There are three types of supervision every clinician will encounter: administrative or employment supervision, clinical supervision, and licensure supervision. They sound similar, they overlap in some weird ways, and agencies often mash them together like a casserole no one asked for or no one would even eat. But they are fundamentally different. So let's look first at the administrative or employment supervision. This is the supervisor who hires you, evaluates your job performance, sets your productivity expectations, approves your personal time off, assigns your caseload, and makes sure you're following agency policy. This is the person who may or may not be a therapist. They might be a social worker. They might be a business manager with zero clinical background. Their job is to make sure that you are doing your job. Here's the key. Administrative supervision is about the agency's need, not your clinical development. If your administrative supervisor says, "You're doing great," that does not mean that your clinical work is sound. What it means is you are following the policies and procedures of the agency, you're meeting the productivity expectations, and you're malleable, you're easy to work with. If they say, "You need to see more clients," that does not mean you're clinically ready, because this is the supervisor who cares about numbers, compliance, documentation deadlines, and whether you're following the rules. Is it important? Absolutely. We all need someone in that type of role. This is the person who helps prep us in many ways for an audit by making sure that documentation is in as it should be. But is it clinical? No. Next, let's look at the clinical supervision. This is the supervision that focuses on your work with clients, maybe has you do some case conceptualizations, talks about your ethical decisions, Maybe you have discussions about countertransference, you do treatment planning with, crisis management, and talk about your emotional reactions to clients. This is where you learn how to think like a clinician. A clinical supervisor helps you understand why a client is stuck, why you're stuck, and how to move the work forward. Clinical supervision is about the craft of therapy. But, and this is where people get tripped up, clinical supervision does not automatically count toward licensure, not unless the supervision meets your state's requirements. Licensure supervision. This is the supervision with legal weight. Your licensure supervision must meet state requirements. They have to be licensed at the correct level, must be approved to supervise, must document your hours, and is legally responsible for your clinical work. This is the person whose signature determines whether you become licensed. All licensure supervision is clinical supervision. Not all clinical supervision counts towards licensure. If your supervisor is not licensed at the required level, or not approved by the state, or not supervising you in the correct way, your hours do not count. And yes, this happens all the time. In my previous role, I was a clinical supervisor. I supervised a number of therapists. I only hold, and at that time only held, an associate's license. And in the state of Pennsylvania, that licensure is not high enough to count towards licensure supervision. And also, I would not have been licensed long enough to count towards licensure supervision. So I was very open with those that I supervised, that while I was supervising them and giving them supervision, this was on-the-job supervision to deal directly with the clients we were working with, but did not count toward your licensure clinical hours. So why do people confuse these roles? It's not your fault. Let's start with agencies. They might call your clinical supervisor, your administrative supervisor, your team lead, your program director, your shift coordinator, all supervisor. You may have someone walk into your office who is at a CEO level or a director level and say, I am your supervisor due to being in the chain of command. So you're like, oh, these are the persons who supervise me. But what do they supervise? Your job? Your hours? Your clinical work? Your ethical decisions? Those are not the same. Sometimes one person is both your administrative and clinical supervisor. So in my situation that I was just speaking about, that's the role where I fell into being both an administrative and clinical supervisor. And it can be great or an absolute disaster because the goals given to that supervisor absolutely 100% conflict with each other. On one hand, as the administrative supervisor, you need to ensure that people are meeting productivity goals, such as, I need you to see 28 clients this week. By seeing 28 clients this week, you're able to bill enough money to not only pay for your salary, but pay for the salary of the person who is at the front desk answering the telephones and contribute to the salaries of IT. When you're looking at it from a clinical supervision hat, you may say, oh my goodness, you are overwhelmed. We need to reduce your caseload. This is too much for you, and you won't be able to make sound clinical decisions when you're overwhelmed. Same person, two opposite messages, and this is why boundaries matter. It is so important to educate yourself. Number one, when it comes to who is my licensure supervisor, do research. Google for your state what the qualifications are for a licensure supervisor and what type of licensure are you going for. In Pennsylvania, I can go for an LPC, a licensed professional counselor, a licensed family marriage counselor, or licensed clinical social worker. So that's three different licensures that I can go for. Plus, there are associate or junior licenses under most of those. There's also a number of years that someone has to hold their licensure. Knowing that, I know that as someone going towards an LPC, I want to find someone who has an LPC, who has had their license for 5 years or more, that those are the two big check boxes to check to ensure that they can supervise me throughout my entire supervision. Now, I know this information, but there may be others, and so it's important to look it up online. If you can't find it online, then you need to call your state board and ask questions. It's important to do this because it's quite possible, and I've seen this happen, where individuals at an agency just don't know the answers. And it's not because they're not educated or they're not being aware. If I can be an administrative supervisor and yet I can be any role possible, I don't necessarily need to have any training as a therapist whatsoever. So, what I call a supervisor is a manager in employment. That's my thought of supervisor and supervising you, supervision. Even clinical supervision, some clinical supervisors haven't done their homework or they hold a different license than what you are seeking. Same thing with that licensure supervisor, making sure that they have the qualifications you need. So you don't only have to do research, but you need to ask questions when you're going into work. Are you my administrative supervisor? Are you my clinical supervisor? Are you my licensure supervisor? Do my hours with you count toward licensure? Are you approved by the state board? What exactly are you responsible for? If you don't ask, you're not going to know, and it's quite possible that no one has ever asked these questions before, and these people may not go and seek out some answers. I have seen situations where people have stayed at an agency for 2 years, went for their licensure, only to find out that the person that was overseeing them for quote unquote licensure supervision were not qualified to do that role. And yet they had people at that agency telling them, oh, all the boxes are checked, everything is good. And of course, part of that is if those people telling you this don't have the same type of education, have maybe done, let's say, case management all of their life, and have never been a therapist. So their assumption is case management and counseling are exactly the same, just in different settings. We know that that's not true because we do an aspect of case management, but we do a lot more of the therapeutic side. So again, if you don't ask, you won't know. Some supervisors overstep their bounds, and out of this can be out of misdirection. This can be out of what they construe as experience. So that means some administrative supervisors give clinical advice and they're not qualified to give it. Yeah, someone who's been in the field 24 years has a great amount of knowledge to share. Best practices change. And again, if they've never been a therapist, they may be sharing what they view as clinical knowledge for their field. But it's going to be different from field to field. Some clinical supervisors give employment advice they shouldn't touch. My licensure supervisor may assume that they're my boss. And again, sometimes they are and sometimes they're not. When it comes to that licensure supervisor, you're going to find a lot of agencies will offer, come work for us, and you can sign this contract that says we'll give you free supervision until you get licensed. And then you just have to stay here for 2, 3, 4, 5 years after you're licensed, and it'll be so much cheaper than what you would pay an outside supervisor. And then there's the option of finding the outside supervisor who, yes, you would have to pay per meeting. Are there pros and cons? Absolutely. If you're in a setting where you're seeing 60 clients in a 40-hour work week, and you've now reached a point that you're licensed, and all you're getting paid is $25, $30 per client. And yet, if you hadn't signed that contract that says, I'm going to stay here, you could go off and work for yourself at that point, or work at a group practice where you would make more money and see less people. On the other hand, maybe because of the stability of community mental health, the idea that whether someone shows up or not, I still get paid for that time, you may say it's worth that because it's a guaranteed paycheck. Grad school teaches us theory. It teaches ethics. It teaches diagnosis. It does not teach how to navigate agency politics, how to advocate for supervision, how to protect your hours, how to understand the legal structure of licensure. So you walk into your first job thinking, supervision is supervision. And then you learn the hard way that it's not. Let's talk about overlap. Because yes, these roles can overlap, but overlap does not mean equivalence. Sometimes one person is your administrative supervisor, your clinical supervisor, and your licensure supervisor. That's great. This can work beautifully. They understand the boundaries, they separate the roles, they communicate clearly. But it can also create a power imbalance, fear of being honest with them, confusion about expectations, and pressure to prioritize productivity over clinical integrity. If your licensure depends on someone who also controls your paycheck, you may not feel safe saying, I'm overwhelmed, or I need help with this client. Agencies treat clinical and administration supervision as the same. This is the most common problem. An agency might say, your supervisor will meet with you weekly. But what they mean is, your administrative supervisor will meet with you weekly to talk about productivity. This is not clinical supervision, and it definitely isn't licensure supervision. But new clinicians don't know that, so they think they're getting supervision until they apply for licensure and the board says, none of these hours count. Then we have supervisors who don't know their own role. Some supervisors genuinely believe, I'm your supervisor, so I supervise everything. I'm licensed, so your hours count. I can give clinical advice even if I'm not your clinical supervisor. This is not true. Supervision is a legal relationship. It is a clinical relationship. It is an employment relationship. Those are all three different contracts. Supervisors become mentors. Mentors become confidants. Confidants become safe people. And that's beautiful, but can also blur boundaries. If your administrative supervisor is also your emotional support, you may not feel safe pushing back on unrealistic expectations. If your licensure supervisor is also your friend, you may not feel safe bringing ethical concerns. Overlap is human, but clarity is essential. Let's talk about what you can do to protect yourself. Clarifying roles immediately. Ask, who is my administrative supervisor? Who is my clinical supervisor? Who is my licensure supervisor? Do my hours with you count towards licensure? Are you approved by the board? If they can't answer clearly, that's a red flag. Put everything in writing. Email your understanding of the roles. Just to confirm, you are my administrative supervisor and my licensure supervisor will be with fill in the blank. Documentation protects you. If it isn't documented, it didn't happen. Supervisors respond better when you bring observations, patterns, questions, and hypotheses, not just, I don't know what to do. Separate job performance from clinical growth. Your administrative supervisor may say you need to see more clients. Your clinical supervisor might say you're at capacity. Both can be true. Both matter, but they are not the same conversations. For clients listening, supervision means your therapist is not working alone. It means someone is reviewing their work, someone is ensuring ethical practice, someone is helping them grow, someone is supporting them behind the scenes. Supervision is not a sign of inexperience, it is a sign of professionalism. Supervision is the backbone of our profession. It's where we learn, where we grow, and where we become the clinicians we're meant to be, but only if we understand it. So ask questions, clarify roles, advocate for yourself, and remember, you deserve supervision that supports your development, not just your productivity. If today's episode helped you understand the supervision maze, please subscribe to The Unlicensed Therapist, share this episode with a colleague or classmate, and keep showing up with curiosity and courage. We'll talk again next week when we talk about the therapist who forgot they're human, self-care, boundaries, and the guilt we don't talk about. Self-care and the therapist. Remember, we're always unlicensed as long as we continue to learn and grow.